Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Do you have a notepad? Do you have a pen handy? I hope so, because I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment that you will jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. Remember, implementation to drive your business forward. That's what this is all about. Now, today we're going to continue our discussion about sales and marketing, or as I like to put it, marketing and sales. And this is the third, or was this the third or the fourth video in the series? It's not imperative that you have watched the others, although you may find some rhyme or reason, and maybe it's a little more sorted in your mind and makes better sense, more logical if you follow along chronologically. So maybe you're going to give some consideration to going back and watching the playlist in order, but it's not imperative. All of these concepts are independently useful to wrap your head around, and it's such a big topic. That's why we're doing this in playlist format. In the first video, we looked at sales and marketing. We compared and contrasted the two and took a look at, what do we mean when we say sales? What do we mean when we say marketing? Are there differences? And certainly in the second video, we looked at and compared and contrasted the difference between tactical and branding marketing strategies. Today we're going to look at, and once again, we're going to compare and contrast traditional versus digital media. And we're going to look at some examples, some characteristics and considerations of the two types. So dig in, and once again, I am going to bring up some notes on the screen. You don't have to jot down any of that stuff because I'm going to make that available to you as a free download. All you have to do is follow the link in the description, enter your your name and email address, and we'll send you a copy of that, no charge. So when you are thinking about your notes, it's about framing this through the lens of your business. How is this relevant in your business? And that's your homework assignment. As you go through this, give some consideration to what of this material do you know really, really well, and what is new to you. There's not a lot of real novel concepts necessarily. Some of you have a lot of exposure to marketing, but that's not really what we're doing here. What we're trying to do is get your brain stimulated early. Hopefully this is at the beginning of a shift. You're thinking, okay, what can I do today to drive my business forward? And we're just trying to stimulate your mind and give you concepts that you may have a fairly good understanding of, but by looking at them and discussing them, chewing on them, so to speak, you can come up with ideas that'll drive you forward. So with that in mind, and without further ado, let's pull up the notes on screen and dive right in. All right, let's start by looking at traditional marketing, traditional advertising. And we're gonna start off with some examples. Now, before I jump right in, I wanna ask you a little question. All of you should get this completely right. What is the absolute best, the most effective form of marketing? Give you 10 seconds. No, I'm not gonna give you 10 seconds. You should know what it is. It's the first thing we're gonna put up on the screen here, and that is word of mouth. Networking, referrals, these are the most effective ways to drive business for you. And they're so important, we will reserve the discussion about that for an entirely separate video, because that merits its own video. There's so much that could be said on that. So today, as I talk about traditional, I would say, of course, that, since the caveman days when Og maybe did his first pterodactyl egg omelet, and it became known by other people that it was great. Word of mouth has been around forever, so it does belong in the category of traditional marketing. Yet we're not going to focus on that today. Instead, we'll focus on the other examples. And so as we get into the characteristics and the considerations as it relates to traditional marketing, I'm not really talking about word of mouth today. I'm going with the other examples. All right, so the next one I have up on the list here is television. You remember what that is? Radio. I've got print up there as well. That's certainly traditional. And in terms of print, some examples I've got up here are newspapers, magazines, newsletters. programs and bulletins for various communities and that kind of thing. So really, any sort of print advertising, something that comes off a printing press, I suppose, is a good way to think of that. And there's so much of that. The next one I have up here is direct mail. And so, you know, the snail mail concept. Some examples up there are flyers, event invitations. Have you received an invitation for a specific private event? You know, that's direct mail. And this direct mail originates with, they have your contact information, usually or often with direct mail, they have your contact information, specifically your mailing address and name, in a database, and then they directly target you as part of a campaign. But also I would include flyers in that, which are indiscriminate. They're not necessarily in a database. They are for a particular target market regarding geography, so a neighborhood or a city, a locale. The other one, out of doors. So some examples of outdoor advertising is billboards, public transit. We've seen, you know, bus benches or the shelters for buses where they have advertising on the outside of that. Also on the bus itself, or some sort of whatever the mechanism is. Some of you are traveling on subways and things like that have advertising both within and without. And then sports facilities. So in Canada, it's very common to have the boards in a hockey rink to have advertising on them. All these are examples of out-of-doors advertising. Events is another traditional form of advertising. So you might plan some sort of a sales and promotional event, and then maybe you're doing other forms of traditional advertising to promote that. You might do some radio to let people know that you have a sales event, or you might do some direct marketing and combinations thereof. All sorts of types of event marketing. Trade shows, so that's very common, and I think if you've been to a convention and maybe they have an exposition floor where people who their target market are people that would tend to attend such a convention or trade show, those are the people there. Or there's building shows and new home construction, renovation, RVs, boat show, car show, all these kinds of trade shows are traditional marketing. Grassroots. Now grassroots, I like to think of it, I think the definition has been fairly broadly stretched, but grassroots, I think of it as sort of going out into the community and bringing your message, your marketing message to the community in a fairly non-aggressive, a fairly passive way, where you're doing something, you're sponsoring a kind of event, so it overlaps with the concept of an event, but you're doing it in a way that your target market is likely to be at the event where you go. So you might go to a community center, you might go to a residential place or someone's place of business, and you do something there that is of value. So I heard about something recently where there was an ice cream truck that was brought to a seniors community. Now this was not a retirement community, like not a, you know, forgive the expression, old folks home. It wasn't a long-term facility, but that was who sponsored the event. Someone who was in charge of marketing for a long-term care facility sponsored an ice cream event where they went to retirement communities with slightly younger, perhaps, or in better health, and they had people come out and they produced posters and all this kind of stuff. That's a grassroots event. So people come down, they have their ice cream, and it's like, well, you know, who put this on or whatever, and there's a representative at the grassroots event that distributes some literature that are, you know, some print literature, some sort of flyer or brochure, pamphlet to do with their facility. So as a person, maybe their health unfortunately starts to suffer and they move on to the next phase of their life into a long-term facility. So that was an example of grassroots marketing that came to my attention recently. But you've probably attended some kind of event where you find out that the person sponsoring the event, of course, their motive is to try to brand themselves, to make you aware of it. And go back to the other video where we talk about branding versus tactical. And grassroots events are a great way to further your branding. Sponsorship is another form of traditional marketing. So you may sponsor local sports teams or something like that. And another one is telemarketing. That still exists. And because telemarketing is so despised, it may be becoming more and more rare, but it still exists. And it's really easy for people to block things on their phone and that kind of stuff. So, but it's still a traditional form of marketing, and it's still out there. Door to door, again, that is sort of going the way of the dodo bird, but you still have people ring your doorbell, and so it's maybe more common in charitable donations, those types of organizations, or services that are hoping to do something on your property immediately. So maybe they come around and they offer some sort of landscaping, snow removal, or some sort of window cleaning, this kind of stuff, door to door. That's a traditional form of marketing. You don't see the proverbial door-to-door salesman with the vacuum cleaners very often as much anymore, but these things still do exist. And product placement is another one. So you think of product placement as being where perhaps in the film industry where your product might make an appearance, that the main protagonist or whatever is wearing your product or using your product in some way. It's also common in sporting events where you can think of the Gatorade product placement, where they may be drinking water out of these bottles that are labeled Gatorade, or you see at the UFC at the end they're holding an empty can of whatever they're sponsoring, these types of things. Product placement, which is designed, of course, to make you think, oh, these people are using the product, therefore it's sometimes celebrity endorsement, or it's just another way of branding and letting people know, okay, well, people who are in this industry or in this sport or whatever, they use it, and you may want to consider using it as well. So those are examples of traditional. Now let's take a look at the characteristics of traditional marketing. And remember, we're not covering word of mouth in this discussion. The first one I have up there is they can be either brand-centric or tactical. So you can utilize traditional marketing to further your brand or to be tactical. And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, go to the previous video in this discussion where we cover all of that. The next one is that it's a high marginal cost of replication. So traditional marketing is the more pricey form of marketing. And the reason for that tends to be that there's a premium on what is at least marketed as limited inventory. And so let's think of airtime. So if you were buying radio or television, they can only offer so many spots, or rather, let's say if it was going to be a 30-second spot, there's only so many of those they can fit in. They got to have some actual content that their listeners or their viewers want to consume in order to be able to sell the advertising to include that. And there's only so much time that they can dedicate to advertising. I would say with print, though, there's not really the limited advertising. So a newspaper who sells more advertising will just make the newspaper thicker. Or a magazine, sometimes you look at a magazine and it's almost exclusively ads. There's very little content and articles in between. A lot of times people are buying the magazines because that particular genre, that area of interest, has all these particularly interesting and fancy ads that people might be interested in. So the concept of limited inventory in print, I think is stretching it, but certainly with radio and television, there is a premium because of the limited inventory. And we'll talk in a few of the other characteristics why there are also maybe some higher costs associated with traditional. Traditional marketing is broad and relatively indiscriminate exposure. And what I mean by that is that you're just going to have to accept, when you engage in traditional marketing, that everyone who consumes that particular medium, so it may be a newspaper they're reading, it may be a television show they're watching, they may be listening to a specific radio station on which you advertised, everyone is consuming your ad, theoretically, but most of them are ignoring it. It's relatively indiscriminate because although you may choose a particular station, a radio station that is more likely to be listened to by your target market, it's not nearly, the reason I say relative to what? Relative to digital marketing. You can't really drill down as well as you can with digital in terms of the data and focused on your target market. So you think of it as like, all right, whatever the percentage may be, 80%, 95% of the people that are being exposed to your advertisement are not interested, and therefore it's very wasteful. And that stuff is not impossible to figure out. Like, you might think about what your target market is or what your market share is, and within a particular community you might have a market share of 10%, which is a strong market share in a lot of industries, and therefore by definition 90% of the people who are listening to that or consuming that media are not likely to be your customers. So you understand when you are advertising and marketing through those channels that, in my example, 90% of it is wasted. Number 4, effectiveness difficult to quantify. And that's just simply the case. Again, it's relative. Compared to digital, it's really hard for you to measure results. And you will find that those representatives who will sell you this media will do all sorts of things to try to convince you that they have, good demographics that are prime for you, and they have good analytics that they can look at. But I've done this for a long time, and compared to digital marketing, it's not even close. So you have this indiscriminate exposure, and then to try to figure out and measure some sort of causation. Well, here's how much we spent. What did we get? How many leads did we get? What kind of conversions did we get out of it? It's not impossible. There are ways to do it, and there are strategies you can do. For example, you might give out a particular promotional code in a print advertisement, and that every time that somebody exercises that coupon or they enter that promotional code, then you get to see, well, the only place that we advertised that was in X, Y, or Z print advertising. So there are things like that, and you can give out verbal promotional codes, and today only for anybody who mentions super deal, when you come into the store you'll get 10% off. These types of things are ways to do it with traditional advertising, where it tends to be inherently built in to digital advertising. So it's difficult but not impossible to quantify the effectiveness. The next one I have up here is you pay by volume, typically not conversion. I'm not aware of too many examples within the traditional marketing media channels that give you an option to pay based on people who buy. There are some of that. There are some sorts of events where a particular company who hosts an event may come in and would charge you based on your sales volume or your profitability. I have seen that, but they typically also charge a base price. So if nobody bought or it's not very efficient, they still are profiting on that. But most of the examples I gave, you're just paying based on volume. So number of spots, and that kind of thing, or number of ads, and do you want a quarter page ad, a half page ad, a full page ad, a double truck, these types of things. This is very common by volume in traditional media, not conversion. Less oversight required by the advertiser, which is you. So as a manager, one of the things that's really, I think, attractive about traditional advertising is you don't have to be as hands-on. The traditional media channels will take care of things for you. So they will, create the ad. They get a little bit of feedback from you. Okay, what are you trying to promote? What inventory or whatever? They'll do the creative for you, and they'll schedule it on the calendar. They'll make sure that it happens. And then to the extent that you ask for it and hold them accountable, they will give you some sort of feedback and prove to you that your spots were delivered as promised per the contract. So there's less involvement for you, and that can be attractive. But you pay for that. So it's often managed end-to-end by the media source. Number 7, costs typically include creative, which is part of what I just said before. So, if you don't have any design skills and you don't actually want to create the ad, you don't want to create a television commercial, you don't want to create a radio spot, you don't want to design the banner ad that's going to go in the magazine, this kind of things. Traditional advertising sources typically include that creative. However, the advertiser may not own the creative. So bear that in mind. So you may have collaborated with the media source, the traditional media channel, and created something that you were very happy with. But then if you went to a different radio station, you went to a different television station, or you went and you wanted to reuse that somewhere else, they may have contractually ownership of that creative because they invested in it. So I've often negotiated up front, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I want ownership of the material that we create. And that's often overlooked. The standard is you don't own the creative. They do. They created it. Number 8, cost typically includes salesperson remuneration. So it's very common in all these aforementioned examples of traditional media that there will be a sales representative, somebody who visits you, who's selling you on the print media, on the spots to go on the air and that kind of stuff. And human beings are expensive. There's high overhead. You have to pay someone a salary, and a salesperson is particularly gifted, and they're a really skilled salesperson is particularly scarce, which means in the marketplace they demand high remuneration packages. And although that may be coming down versus what it once was, you may find that the huge 6-figure incomes earned by those that sell advertising are not as commonplace today as they once were. Bear that in mind. This is another reason why traditional marketing tends to be less cost effective than digital, is because you've got to pay for a person, and these people are building relationships with you, trying to get to know your business. Once again, that's very helpful if they are doing things end to end and managing stuff for you. The more they know about you, it can be very seamless for you, but you are paying that. That comes at a price. There is a higher barrier of entry financial to digital. That's a characteristic, of traditional advertising. But there's a lower barrier of entry in terms of skill set and experience. So bear that in mind. So if you don't have much in the way of a skill set for marketing and design and advertising and managing all that for your business, then traditional appeals often to people like that, because they're like, we've got this covered. This is what we do. And so I think those are the characteristics that I have for traditional. Now let's jump into digital. Let's start off with some examples. The very first one is your website. I've done another video on what you should look for in a website and what you should include in your website, so watch that. But I'll do another one in terms of analysis of the effectiveness of your website. So we won't cover that today, but the website is clearly the most important digital asset in terms of marketing that you will have. Next one up here I've got is search engine optimization. You've heard about this, SEO, and this refers to the ease with which the bots, the little crawlers on a browser, can find the information on your website and organically feed it to those people that are doing organic searches. And when I say organic, I mean they enter keywords and that it finds and serves you up as an alternative or an option for them to consider to go to your website, and it's not a paid ad. So you've seen with the search results returns, sometimes there's ads on the top or on the side, and those are not search engine optimization. Search engine optimization refers to things that you can do on your website, tactics you can employ to make sure that you're easy to find for various search engines. And then we have search engine marketing, SEM. That is your pay-per-click, PPC, or display network ads. So these are very common. If you go to maybe a local news site or something like that, and you see the display network are those visually appealing ads that look more like a print ad where somebody designed imagery to go along with it, whereas pay-per-click are more those text-based ads. And I'm saying that generally speaking, there is some overlap there. You can have pay-per-click pricing model on display network, but often the display network is you pay per say 1,000 impressions. So they measure how many people visited the page while your ad was appearing, and two people in two different households can look at the same web page within the display network and see two different ads, because it's based on things like interests and their browsing history, and they're trying to make them more effective. So they're trying to serve your ads to the people that are most likely to click on them. Another real important thing about the display network is something known as cookies, or what we would call remarketing, also known as retargeting codes. So somebody visits your website, so they had some reason to go there in the past, maybe through search engine optimization. Your products or services appealed to them when they did a keyword search. They went onto your website, and you use cookies on your website, and on their browser there was some remarketing code installed, and now the display network knows that they bounced from your website, but at one point they were interested. So maybe you're a travel agent or something like that, and you then everywhere the person goes who visited your website, they see specials and offers on vacation packages and that kind of stuff. So you've seen this. It's not really uncommon. It's mostly known these days, but in the early days of remarketing, people were like, it's just creepy. I looked for a particular lamp online, and then everywhere I went online, I saw lamps for sale. Well, that's a strategy, and that's part of search engine marketing. This is very effective. The next one I have up here is social media. So of course you can advertise on Facebook and all various other platforms of social media. Often there is a advertising component to their business model. YouTube, I could have included that as part of social media, because technically it is social media, or you could also think of YouTube as a search engine, because it is very popular. I think it's the second most popular search engine in the world after Google. But I've got some different types of examples of advertising that come up on YouTube opportunities there. Pre-roll, those are the videos that appear at the beginning of a video that we get driven nuts by. In video, so that is you're halfway through a video or whatever, and it starts to play an ad, another video. There's display opportunities. So within YouTube, while you're looking at search results pages and everything, you may have seen on the corner, you've got some sort of ad display that a person can click on, but it's not associated with a specific video. You have paid and sponsorship of specific videos. So you may be watching your favorite YouTuber, and his video is sponsored. And so within that video, he typically will promote his sponsor. So all that is part of digital marketing. Content marketing is very popular these days, and the examples I have up here are you create blogs, vlogs, podcasts, webinars, newsletter, ebooks. The thing here is that you are creating content that is of interest to people who may be part of your target market. And so you're offering this content often or typically for free. They can download it, they can sign up to receive it, and then when they receive it, and if it's credible or useful to them, they consume that value, then they associate that with your brand, and then when they're in the market for something that you sell, a product or service, they're more likely. And of course, also with that, you can complement that or supplement that with some remarketing and retargeting to a certain extent. Email campaigns is another very common form of digital marketing. So in your inbox right now, assuredly you have some newsletters and promotional campaigns that have been sent to you by businesses that you deal with. Google My Business. So when you do a search and you notice that on the right-hand side of the screen, separate from the search engine results, there's also some things that appear that are known as Google My Business. So you can set up within Google information that makes it really handy when when Google returns a result and it puts up on the page things about your business. And that can include photos, promotions. You can have 360-degree tours of your facility, your hours, information, all sorts of stuff can be that on there. Your reviews, your online reputation, your Google reviews are there. And that's part of digital marketing. Central repository. So the traditional form of this that I didn't even include because it's not really a thing anymore, but the yellow pages would be like a central repository, a business listing, index of all sorts of businesses. So you'd look up by category, but they still have these online now, and there are places. So maybe you run an automotive dealership and there is a index of all the automotive dealers or something like that. If you're a plumber, you might be part of a central repository that lists all the plumbers locally, this kind of thing, and that's available on a website. Next one I have up here is association and affiliate sites. Again, in my example of automotive, you may have your dealership advertised on the automotive association website, and people go there for other reasons. They're looking up other things, and then they also can do a search and find you from there. So affiliate sites, think of those as perhaps maybe you're a franchise, and they can go to the OEM, to the franchisor, and find a list of the franchisees within a particular market. There's all sorts of types of things like that. So you might have an affiliation with, Better Business Bureau, all sorts of different types of third-party sites. And that's the other one I have up here, the third-party referral sites. There are, you may have a partnership with other businesses, and they include a link to your website on theirs. And there's also places you can go and pay for this, and often they'll do reviews and that kind of thing. So people who are looking at the reviews and they want to see, compare and contrast various businesses in a particular industry on a third-party pundit expert website, that kind of thing, they have links to your site from there. And then the last one I have up here is influencer, and that's become popular where perhaps there's some social media influencer, someone who has a big following, and it's the modern equivalent of celebrity endorsement and maybe even product placement. So somebody who is big on Twitter or Instagram may endorse your product or use your product or mention your product or whatever. And because they're so popular, they have so many hundreds of thousands or millions of followers that trust them, that is maybe an effective way that you could get your word out to those, to that market. All right, those are the examples. Now let's look at some characteristics of digital, and you're gonna find that the theme follows along with almost the opposite of what we discussed with traditional marketing. So digital can also be brand-centric or tactical. So both traditional and digital advertising can either be used to promote your brand or be more tactical. And I remind you, watch that video if you don't know what I'm talking about there. There is a low marginal cost of replication because digital, once you create it, it can be repurposed over and over again, and you typically pay per click. So there's unlimited inventory, and so there's savings based on that. When you think of scarcity and supply and demand, the effect on pricing, well, digital, has such a low cost of replication and unlimited inventory that there's really low cost relative to traditional media. There is a narrow and relatively targeted exposure. So if we use the example of social media advertising, well, Facebook knows more about you than you know about yourself. And Facebook is, what they say these days is if you're getting a product for free, then you are the product. What they mean by that is that Facebook is selling your digital profile, your data to advertisers so that they can be very targeted and serving up ads to you. And that may be why you've seen very interesting ads that come up. And some people actually like that. Some people prefer that, compared to the old days, instead of wasting time watching a 30-second commercial on a television show that has no interest to you whatsoever, that on Facebook, that if you're seeing an ad, it's probably something you've expressed interest in some way. It can be a little bit creepy, and generally speaking, advertising is not well liked by people who are just looking to consume content, but that is one of the characteristics of it, is certainly digital advertising has a narrow focus. You can be very targeted as an advertiser. Effectiveness, easy to quantify. There are very powerful analytics that are available on all your digital marketing. And we'll get into that in a different video. We don't have time today to discuss that, but I'll dig in with you because it's a little intimidating, but sky's the limit. If you are a glutton for data like I am, you can spend hours poring over it, and you know what's effective and what's not when it comes to digital marketing. Put up there, you have access to powerful analytics. Pay by conversion, not volume. So the exact opposite of traditional media. Typically, you will pay based on somebody ends up on your website. So they are served up your ad, they click on it, and they go to your website. If that was SEM that I was just giving you an example of, you don't pay if they see your ad but they didn't click on it. It's the conversion points that you would often pay for. Although we did say that you also have, it's not uncommon in digital marketing, pay per exposure. So say 1,000, pay per 1,000 times that it was displayed to somebody on a page. Greater oversight required by advertisers. So to the extent that you're going to do this yourself, then you have greater oversight. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your interest. So if you want to do this from start to finish, you can. And because you're not paying a sales rep and a whole media channel to handle this stuff for you, you're going to save some money. That is to say, this may be a do-it-yourself, or you can outsource it. And you want to consider both of those things. But the oversight is done by the advertiser. Creative costs are in addition to the pay-per-click costs. So if you were going to have something on a display network ad or whatever, you would often have to pay to create the ad, where we said in traditional, they're like, well, our price includes, we'll create the ad for you. We have designers on staff and that kind of stuff. Well, you're gonna often have to create your own ads, write your own copy for text-based ads and so forth. The creative is not included. Although you own the stuff that you create, and you should repurpose your creative assets. I've got an entire video on repurposing creative assets, and it's a good video that you should watch on this. So I'm not going to get into that today, other than to merely define what I mean by that. If you've created a display network ad that's going to be out there as part of advertising campaign, you can also use that in social media. Any of the time that you put in, the design time into the ad, it can also appear on your website. You own it and you can repurpose it. Number 9, self-service or self-serve nature eliminates commissions. So the price is lower. Again, you're not paying a sales representative because of the self-serve nature of this. There is a low barrier of entry for financial, and conversely, a higher barrier of entry for do-it-yourself. So you have, if you're going to do it yourself, the barrier of entry becomes your knowledge. You have to develop that skill set, experience the knowledge. And there's no shortage of resources out there where you can really learn how to go in and set up your own, optimization for search engines, or to do your own ads and your keywords and negative keywords and all this kind of stuff. There's courses that Google will offer them, and there's no shortage of courses on YouTube and that kind of stuff that you could take to learn about this, but that's a high barrier of entry because of your time. So you want to give consideration to whether that's worth it or not, and that's why outsourcing it is often a consideration. It's still lower priced. All right, now let's look at the best practices with the two, the considerations that you should have. The first one I have up there is you need either way to clearly define your target market. I mean, if you're going to use traditional media and the price associated with that, you really want to make sure that you know who you are trying to target. And the same goes for digital media. I mean, to the extent that you have not defined your target market, then you can't go after it. Even in my example of Facebook or a social media company that has the data, and they could serve your ads very effectively to your target market. If you have not defined that target market, then you can't really make sure. Like, you have to enter the interests in this kind of thing. You have to define that. The next one up here is, once again, define and strictly adhere to a budget. Marketing can be if not the single largest expense, it can be in the top three. It's often in the top three. So maybe your people, your human resources, your payroll is your highest expense. Perhaps your inventory and maintaining that is your next highest expense. But I would say marketing for many of you, advertising, marketing, and the various things that go along with that under the umbrella of marketing. Personnel who are spending their time doing marketing for your organization, or whether you outsource this or use an agency like Bickert Management or something like that, there is a great deal of expense involved in marketing. So you want to make sure you have a budget and you stick to that. Employ a Trident return on investment analysis to measure effectiveness. I'm going to create an entirely different video on that, and you should visit that one where we explain what that means. And the real concept, I guess, today that you have to understand is that your return on your marketing investment is critical, and there is a way to look at this very closely, a three-pronged approach to looking at this that I endorse, and we'll get into that in greater detail in the interest of time in another one, but make sure you're measuring effectiveness. The next one I have up here is schedule everything. So creative meetings. So if you're going to engage in marketing, communicating your value to your customers, you want to have some creative meetings with your other stakeholders, collaborate with people, put your heads together and come up with some ideas, but have a regular meeting scheduled on that. Don't just do this once and think it's done. You've got to do it, say, maybe weekly, maybe monthly, depends on your business. Also your plan. So what is your plan? So you put your heads together, you came up with a plan. Now you've got to put that on a calendar. It has to be scheduled. It's like, okay, well, here's our social media strategy. We're going to have these types of posts and we're going to put them on these different platforms, on these different social media channels, when, at what time. You have to schedule everything. If you're not doing this, you're not using a calendar, you're not going to be effective. You're going to waste some time and money. You can't afford to do that. Also, reviewing your results. So what I would endorse is that creative meeting that you have on a recurring basis. You also review the results of the last meeting. And then when you talk about your plan and your strategy, you can incorporate that as part of the meeting, but it has to be scheduled. Things don't just happen in your spare time. There's no such thing as spare time in business. You have to be deliberate, very coordinated, and schedule time for this kind of stuff. If you don't, it's not just going to happen by luck. And those effective businesses out there who are really good at marketing, and you can't afford for your competition to be this and it not be you, those effective businesses will schedule everything. Number 5, hold responsible stakeholders accountable. So who is responsible in your organization? Maybe it's you, it's probably someone else in your organization. It may even be outsourced to somebody. Whoever is responsible for your marketing strategy, you have to hold them accountable. What about these, maybe you're doing some of that traditional media, you're buying from a sales rep that is selling you some airtime, some radio spots, some television spots, maybe some print. Hold those people accountable for your results. And perhaps they can be part of your meeting. Certainly if they're an in-house part of a resource, they can be part of those meetings. But don't be afraid to invite external sources to your meetings. Although I have experienced where sometimes you might want to talk about proprietary strategies that you don't want necessarily an external stakeholder to be part of that meeting. But to the degree that you can make sure that you preserve your proprietary strategies and make sure that those aren't shared, invite other stakeholders, even external ones, to these planning meetings and schedule them. But the key is hold people accountable for your results. You can't just say, well, we'll hope for the best, because people will just keep on spending your money and not getting any results. Build future strategies around the data. So that's why before we talked about digital marketing has very powerful analytics and the data can be fed back. And I told you it's not as viable or it's not as easy to do, but it is possible with traditional marketing to capture data points, and you should to the greatest extent possible, and then respond to that data. That's what I'm getting across here is don't just let the data, don't worry about your escalating commitments or your confirmation bias. you want to make sure you respond to the data. The next one I have up here is separate friends and business. So we talked about sales people, sales representatives that are building relationships, and maybe they're handling some of your stuff end to end, or maybe you have an outsourced marketing agency or somebody in-house. Business is business. We all understand the humanities portion of business and that we build relationships, and that's great, but don't make your decisions, your marketing decisions and expenditures, and deviate from budget and everything based on a relationship. I have seen that a lot of traditional marketing sales reps are very attractive individuals, and this is by design. They're going and getting people who can influence your decision based on something that's not logical, but that's not going to be you. You're an effective manager. You're effective. That's why you're watching this. You're not going to, so-and-so is gorgeous, and when she smiles, and you don't dismiss what I'm telling you here. This is part of the strategy, and it's very common. It's not by accident that there happen to be some gorgeous people that are selling advertising, because they know they have good influence and it's a well-paying gig. So make sure that you're not susceptible to that you're impervious to it. You want to make sure that you separate. And the other thing is, forget about how attractive someone is. What about the relationship? Sometimes you've been dealing with a particular sales rep for many years, buying advertising, maybe the particular radio station or television station. That same person has built a great relationship with you. Over the years, they've given you Christmas presents, maybe you've golfed with them, they've wined and dined you. A lot of that stuff is sort of dying out. That was really popular in the older days, and I don't mean that long ago. It still happens now. They build that relationship. That's good salesmanship, building that relationship. But now when it's time for you to say, the data doesn't support the decision, I'm gonna have to reduce my budget or eliminate the advertising, it's really difficult with those relationships in place to make that decision. But as an effective manager, you're paid to make the difficult decisions. You need to do it. Separate friends and business. The next one up here is practice generalist management and outsource to the expert. If you haven't seen my video on generalist management, then watch that. We'll put a link in the description. But you don't need to know everything. You can't know everything, but you should know a little bit. What I'm saying to you here is learn enough about marketing that people can't trick you, and you know what's possible, and you know enough to make sure that you can guide and oversee things, but you don't need to know, and you can't know every little thing. And then outsource to the experts. Now you can hold them accountable. I've got another video that is titled Never Produce Anything In-House That Can Be Purchased for Less, and that's based on Adam Smith, the great moral philosopher and economist from the 18th century, who basically said, never make anything that you can buy for less. So you have to realize that you have a finite amount of time in terms, and that's a great resource, very precious resource, your time for you. You can't be spinning too many plates or wearing too many hats at once, and maybe you're not the best marketer. Unless you have a particular knack for this, if you have a particular enjoyment of it, and you have proven through data points that you can do this effectively, and you want to continue to invest more and more knowledge and time at going after your marketing yourself, then I think you should outsource it, unless all those other conditions are in place. Because you have to drive value, and maybe leave it to an expert so that you don't waste the money. Or at least collaborate with your expert in the meantime, outsource it, and then you can taper down the amount of reliance you have on that expert, that outsourced expert that, maybe you hired us, and in the beginning we did all of it for you, but in our meetings, in our collaboration with you, you learned more and more, and you say, okay, I'm gonna take on this part myself. I actually enjoy this part. That's completely acceptable. But trying to do this from the beginning on your own can be a very daunting task. And that goes to number 9. Beware Dunning-Kruger effect and rabbit holes. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is that thing where we tend to do a self-evaluation of ourselves. We would report that we are more competent than we really are. That is, the less competent we are, there's this inverse relationship where we tend to rate ourselves as more competent. And it's very dangerous as it relates to marketing. We have a video on the Dunning-Kruger effect. Watch that. We have lots of videos on this stuff. There's so much to learn, but beware of that, because then you start to learn a little bit and you're like, hey, I can do this. Yeah, you can set up your own SEM campaign and you can set up your own retargeting code, but should you? Be careful, because maybe you fail to just take into consideration some other points and you waste money very quickly. And I say beware of rabbit holes, because you can start to dig in and go, wow, there is so much to learn here. You go down one of those rabbit holes and it's like, wow, there's just a ton of information, and it's distracted you from what you do best and where your business needs you the most. Number 10, I just put up there geofence, because I've made this mistake before. So there's when we talk about your target market, you are perhaps dealing more locally, not necessarily, but if you're not dealing nationally or internationally, then make sure, if you're doing any of this stuff yourself or somebody else is doing it for you, that they geofence and you are only targeting geographical regions that you're likely to do business. That comes back to clearly defining your target market, and your geography is a big one. Make sure you're geofencing and not advertising outside of the area that you're likely to get any revenues. Favor results-based mediums. And again, that's really kind of like saying favor digital. But what I'm telling you is, if you can't support with data the results, then you are more likely to waste money. And most of my audience can't afford to waste any money. Nobody should waste money, but there are businesses out there that have a lot more to play with in terms of marketing budget than most of the people I'm addressing right now. So you should favor results-based, pay per click. Okay, that's a conversion, that's a result, and based on that result, I paid a specific price that was determined up front. Negotiate whenever possible. I will tell you, traditional media especially is very negotiable. Things are changing so rapidly for them, and oftentimes their market share is shrinking and everything. Unfortunately, some people are dying a slow death in those industries, and but the good thing for you is they are highly negotiable. But be careful, just because you can get 50% off. I have negotiated deals which were 80% off what they originally told me their charge for this particular print that I have in mind. And it was one of these little magazines that goes to specific neighborhoods. And I was able to negotiate 80% off, and we still chose not to do it because we just couldn't see the advertising results paying off. We just didn't think it was good enough. Another one was in the supermarkets. You know, they have sometimes on the back of the receipts, or sometimes on the little dividers, they have local businesses, or even on the shopping carts, there's advertising availability there. We looked at that. They were highly negotiable. What they told us they wanted and what we were able to negotiate it down to were night and day, and still afterwards we weren't able to substantiate the results very good, and I think we overpaid. So if you're going to try something, and I don't have that up here, but I did mention that in the last video, that it's okay to experiment once in a while. It's not completely science. There's a lot of art to marketing, and I can appreciate that you might want to try new things. You should try new things from time to time, but measure that. And if you're going to try something that is more traditional based, even if it's digital and it's a third-party website, maybe it's unproven, this kind of thing, negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. All right, we've been at this almost an hour. That was a lot of information to digest, and I hope you got something out of this. We're gonna cover a lot more stuff in future videos, so continue to watch this and learn about marketing. As I said, this is an area that you can end up spending a lot of money, so invest that time, and the investment in your knowledge is, gonna have a huge return on investment. Meanwhile, if some of this stuff just is, frazzling your brain, you're like, I don't want to deal with any of this, then reach out to us. We want to help you, and we can put together a marketing package, something bespoke, or on our website. You can just sign up for some of the individual services, and you don't have to deal with this at all. And we'll collaborate with you and work with you over time. And if you want to learn more afterward and take on more, then you're welcome to do that, of course. And I would encourage each of you to leave a comment. What did you get out of this? What did you not understand? What would you like me to elaborate on? When you leave comments and someone else who's watching this, you know, these entrepreneurs, managers, aspiring managers, they read your comments and we learn. And we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.